I'm Kira Dulaney of Kira K Designs, back with the third pattern in a series that I designed in collaboration with Missouri Star. We've been working on hybrid crochet, which is also called Tunisian crochet, and building skills through a cowl or scarf, or maybe you did both, and a blanket, and now we're ready to do a garment. Now, a lot of folks are nervous the first time they make a garment, and I know that, so I designed this with the first-time garment crocheter in mind. It is a relaxed fit. It's worked side to side, so even if your gauge is a little bit off, you can adjust the sizing as you're making the top. And it has minimal finishing. Plus, it's just really cute. So I think that you might want to make a whole lot of them in different colors in the 2 different lengths and really build your wardrobe with a super wearable top that's easy and fun for you to crochet. So you can get kits at the link below or at MissouriQuiltCo.com, and I'm going to walk through some tips and tricks and show you the construction, which is a little interesting. Let's get started. First thing you want to think about when you're making a wearable is the sizing. We're going to go through checking our gauge for sure, because otherwise the sizing is not going to be what you expect. But I also want to stop you now before you order your kit to figure out what size you want to make. It can be a little tricky because if you don't make your own clothing yet, you don't know what size you want. Normally you go to a store and you try on 2 or 3 or 4 sizes and look at them and move around and decide which one you want to wear. And you can't do that very easily when you're making it. So let's talk a little bit about sizing. This particular pattern has 8 sizes and it also has 2 different lengths. And I've got a few ways that you can decide what size you want to do. First thing you want to do is measure yourself and figure out what size you are. So when you measure for garments, usually we're talking about a chest measurement, and that's going to be at the fullest part of the chest. Depending on how you're shaped, could be that your fullest part is a little bit lower, and that's totally fine. Just measure the fullest part of your body that's underneath where the top is going to go. It can be helpful if you can have somebody else measure you, but if you're careful, you can do this on your own. You just want to make sure, like I just did there, that your tape isn't twisted. So you'd measure around the fullest part of the bust and see where it meets. Don't squish it in, but also don't leave extra right now. So here I've got this mannequin is 38. Then you're going to think about ease and how much you want your top to be bigger than or smaller than you. And let me warn you that a lot of people misjudge how much ease they want. They will think, well, I don't want it tight. How about 4 inches? Which is getting into what we call an oversized fit. This mannequin is 38 inches. The top is 36 inches. It doesn't look really tight, does it? It's because it's a boxy top, which means even though it's stretching to fit a little bit at the fullest part of the chest, there's still room down here. I measure about 36, 37 inches, depending on my undergarments. I wear this 36-inch top. It is perfect, and it doesn't look tight because it isn't skin tight all the way around. And that might or might not be a look you want, but this is really flattering even if it's got 0, even a negative ease at the bust, up to 1 inch or 2. You can make your own decisions as you want, but think about it. Maybe measure some tops that you like the fit of, especially if they're a similar kind of a fabric, and make a decision rather than just guessing. So once you figured out your sizing, you can order your kit, and when the yarn comes, you're going to want to swatch. The yarn for this is Elizabeth Levold Designer Choice Silky Wool. It's a really, really nice yarn for garments. It is a blend of wool with silk and nylon, and it's got a little bit of a tweedy look to it. Not too much, so you can definitely still see the stitch pattern, but the tweed in here gives it a little bit of depth, and it's a really nice feel to it as well. We're going to have kits in a few different colors, and you might end up wanting to do a few of these, especially with the 2 different lengths, maybe even different sizes for a more oversized fit for some. This is definitely yarn that you want to wind into a ball before you get started, otherwise you'll get a big tangle. And I know you're excited to start a top, because it is really exciting, but I am going to tell you, you really want to swatch this one. Because it's a garment, you want it to fit the way that you decided. And also, yarns can change when you block them, and lace especially expands a little bit when you block it. So if you just start and it looks like it's the right size, it's probably going to be bigger than you want at the end. The swatch is also nice to give you a chance to learn the stitch pattern, give it a try, get the mistakes out of your system, and feel more confident going into the actual project. So we're going to do a swatch together. You can do it with me on screen now, and then you will be ready to block your swatch and measure your gauge. We'll do all that together, and then I'll talk you through the construction of the top. All right, so for this project, you're going to need your yarn, of course. The number of skeins is going to depend on the size that you want, but the kit will have all that figured out for you. You're also going to want at least one removable stitch marker. There's a moment in the pattern where you will need to put that in a loop and let it stay there for a while. It's also nice sometimes at the end of a row just to hold your working loop. You're going to need a hook. I did this on a J, which is 6mm hook, and it is necessary to use what we call a Tunisian crochet hook, where it's got either a long stick or one of the cables. I find the cables are a little bit better because it lets the weight of a bigger piece rest on your lap or the table rather than resting all on one of your wrists. You don't need a super long cord here, depending on the size and the length, but you might want one just for comfort. At the end, you're also going to need a darning needle or tapestry needle to tuck in your yarn tails. Always good to have a tape measure nearby. And for blocking, you're going to want some kind of a surface for blocking, like blocking mats, and you may or may not want some pins for blocking. Depends a little bit on how much you need to open up the lace, but it's good to have some stainless steel T-pins with you to get started. This stitch pattern is a pretty cool one. It is a really easy lace. It's very gridded, which I like if you're new to lace because you can see how things stack up. These holes are right on top of the holes from the previous row, which gives you a visual way to know that things are working before you get to the end of the row and may realize that you're short a stitch or have an extra stitch. It's not hard to do, and there are only 2 rows, and as usual with this pattern series, the return pass is the same as it has been. So especially if you have worked through the other patterns or just watched the videos, you've got the skills that you need to do this one. All right, so let's do a swatch so we can learn this stitch pattern. It's called the arrowhead stitch, although a lot of stitch patterns will have different names in different sources. I'm going to start with my foundation chain and foundation row. This particular pattern is any even number of stitches, so I'm just going to do 12 so we can get through it pretty quickly. We'll start with my slip knot, and I'm going to chain 12 and do a foundation row. If you've already done the foundation rows for other projects, feel free to skip ahead and find me when I'm ready for the next row. So I've got the foundation chain. I'm going to do my foundation row as usual. I like to work on the back side of the chains, inserting my hook into the bump, and I'm going to skip the very first one. So into the second chain, into the bump, yarn over and draw up a loop, and I'm going to repeat that for the rest of the row. I'm going to go a little fast, but feel free to go at your own speed. You can always pause me, which is the beauty of watching this video as opposed to being together in a classroom and trying to keep up. Now, I didn't mention this before, it's always good to work those chains loosely. It'll give stretch to the finished edge, but also it'll make this row a little hard. So if you're really struggling with inserting your hook, if that's super tight, start over, chain loosely. You will be much happier crocheter if you do that. Now at the end of our forward pass of the foundation row, we should have the 12 stitches we started with, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Always a good thing to check. We're going to keep doing that as we get into the lace stitch too, because it can be a little trickier when you're doing something new. Return pass is going to be the same the whole time. Yarn over and draw through 1 loop 1 time, and then yarn over and draw through 2 loops repeatedly until you can't do it anymore. And that'll be the end of our foundation row. All right, so this particular pattern has 2 rows. Row 1, as always, will have a forward pass and a return pass. Row 1 starts like this. I'm going to skip my first vertical bar here because I already have a loop coming out of it. And I'm going to insert my hook into the next 2 bars. You will recognize this as a simple stitch 2 together. So into 2 bars, and then yarn over and draw up a loop. That is a decrease. So I'm going to pair it with an increase. And in this case, I'm going to pair it with a yarn over increase, because I want holes. This is lace. So yarn over, I just do a yarn over and get that wrap on my hook. And then we're going to repeat. I'm going to do a Tunisian simple stitch 2 together. So into the next 2 bars, yarn over and draw up a loop, and then a yarn over. So it's like a decrease, increase, and they balance out. And we'll keep doing this till we get near the end of the row. This particular pattern is a multiple of 2 stitches. And if you want to get really precise, it's a multiple of 2 stitches plus 2 edge stitches. There's the one that I had on my hook at the beginning, that starting loop, and then as you get to the end, don't worry that you don't have 2 stitches at the end. That is correct. I have my last stitch here, and I just did a simple stitch 2 together. I need to remember to do a yarn over at the end. It is really easy to forget that one. That's also why we're going to count, just to make sure. And at the end stitch, my preference is generally to go into 2 strands of it because I find that gives me a neater and more stable edge. And then we're going to count. So here I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. You'll notice some of them are slanted a little bit differently. That's fine, that's actually good. It means that you've got your yarn overs on there correctly. You can also check yourself if you're not sure about the direction of a yarn over. They should be slanting sort of down as they go to the right. And so I would think of that as a backslash as opposed to a forward slash. If you had forward slashes on there, and that would happen if you did your yarn over this way, like a knitter, as opposed to like a crocheter, then you would end up with the extra stitches, but you wouldn't get nice holes. They would be twisted and close up a little bit. You can see that more as we do the end of this row and the next row as well. For our return pass is going to be the same as it has been. Yarn over and draw through 1 loop once, and then yarn over and draw through 2 loops till you can't do it anymore, which means you have finished your row. And then we're going to take a look at it because honestly, it looks a little weird at this stage. And I don't want you to worry that yours looks weird because mine does too. Often in a hybrid crochet or Tunisian crochet, the top of the piece looks strange until you finished it. This one looks even stranger because we've got that kind of gappy looseness that's always there. Plus we have holes that we made on purpose below. So together they can make people worry that they did something wrong. So you can see I've got these holes, they're almost square, but there's like a little strand in the corner there. And it looks a little loose and weird. That's actually going to work in our advantage because the next row we're going to put our hook into the holes. All right, so after the row 1, we're going to start row 2, which is a little bit different. We're going to start with a simple stitch in the first stitch. So we always skip this very first bar. So really I suppose it's a second stitch I'm going into, but the first one I'm making. So my hook goes sideways into that bar and I yarn over and draw up a loop. And then I'm going to do a Tunisian full stitch. It's the abbreviation is TFS. It's full, like I had plenty for dinner, I'm done eating, I'm full. And for that one, it's kind of fun because I'm going to go into the big hole. So I'm going into the space between stitches and yarn over and draw up a loop. Really easy to find. You can almost feel your way and give your neck a rest and not look down at it. And then we're going to repeat. So a simple stitch through the vertical bar and then a full stitch into the hole. I'm going to keep doing this till I get to the end of the row, which won't take long since we're just doing a little swatch. Now a bigger swatch is not a bad idea for gauge, and you could certainly do this with 20 or 22 stitches to get a better representation. I admit I tend to do small gauge swatches because for me that works and my stitches are pretty consistent, but bigger never hurts and might be better for you. Now as I came to the end, remember our repeat was a simple stitch then a full stitch. So I finished the repeat. I'm not quite at the edge. To finish, I'm going to go into my final stitch, and as usual I like to go under 2 strands and yarn over and drop a loop. Then I highly recommend you count just to make sure that you do still have the number that you started with. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. I am good. This is also a great time to stop and admire your work, or if you like to take photos for social media, take a photo now. For one thing, it looks better, right? We don't have that loose top edge, but also this is recognizably this craft. It's clearly not traditional crochet, it's not knitting. Even if people can't tell that from the piece, if you just post a photo of this, they might not know what craft it is. If you post a photo like that, people will know. Or they will not know what it is and they will be intrigued and they will learn how to do this craft too, which means you're bringing more people into the fold, which is always good. So return pass is the same as usual. Yarn over and draw through 1 loop, and then yarn over and draw through 2 loops repeatedly. And those are the 2 rows, but I'm going to do them again just so that you can see how they build. Because last time I did row 1, I was working into a foundation row, and this time I'm working onto the piece. So this pattern is just these 2 rows. So I've already done everything, but I'm going to do it one more time so you can see how each section builds on the one before. So I'm starting row 1 again. I skip my first vertical bar and then Tunisian simple stitch the next 2 together. And I like to notice that of those 2, the second one is on top of the hole from the previous repeat. And that helps me know that things are working and I'm in the right place. If you have a mistake, it is likely going to be a 1-stitch mistake, and you might notice if you're trying to put like these 2 together, it looks different, it feels different. It actually is harder for me to get into them in that order, and then I would notice and see if maybe I made a mistake earlier. So we're going to keep doing this to the end of the row. Remember that that yarn over is the end of your repeat. Don't skip the last yarn over. It is easy to do. And then you're going to go into your final stitch underneath the 2 strands at the edge for a nice neat edge. Double check that you have the number that you were working with. I've got 12 for my sample. And actually it's easier to count here because they kind of pair up into little groups. And then the return pass is the same as usual. And I'm going to do row 2 for you one more time as well. So row 2, we skip the first vertical bar, do a Tunisian simple stitch into the next one, and then Tunisian full stitch into the big hole, and then repeat. Simple stitch and a full stitch. And since the repeat is simple and then full, as you get to the end, make sure you do them both. So here's my simple stitch. Don't forget that last full stitch. It's another easy way to lose one. But if you're counting, you will be able to check. And then I would keep going from there. I'm actually going to put this aside for the moment and take a look at the construction of the sweater because it is a little unusual. For this pattern, I wanted to make this a one-piece construction because putting together a lot of pieces is a whole nother skill set. We will do a little bit of seaming, but this one is really easy to do, and also you can adjust it as you go and adjust the fit. The other main reason that I did it side to side is because in general, Tunisian crochet, also known as hybrid crochet, does not have much lateral stretch. There's very little give to this side to side in the direction that the rows were worked. There's a lot more stretch up and down. This is actually a stretchy fabric this way. So if I put the inelastic one going around the body, it's not going to be very comfortable to wear unless it's a really oversized fit, and it's not going to be an adjustable fit. If we go sideways so that the rows are going around the body, I now have something that is stretchy. It's easier to get on my body for one thing, but also it's more comfortable to wear, and it does give you the option of having that little bit of negative ease if that's how you like to wear things. So that means we start with the sleeve. So I made a little miniature version here so you can see the construction because it feels a little weird when you're making it. When I was making my samples, people would ask what I was making, and they never guessed I was making a top or a shirt. They either had no idea or they thought it was a scarf or a blanket or something because I might have seen a corner somewhere, and it doesn't look like a garment till it's done. The way we do this is we start with a sleeve, which is actually really nice because you get a chance to go through the rows without a whole lot of stitches to start. So you do some rows of the sleeve. It depends a bit on the size as to the number of stitches that you have. So the pattern will have that for all 8 sizes. And then once you've gone through the sleeve, you're going to need to add stitches for the body. So the way this is going to fit on the body is I'm going to fold it, and now it looks like a little t-shirt, right? So we're starting on the sleeve going from the underarm up and over and back and forth and back and forth. And you get to the point where you need to add stitches to add the length to the body. And there are 2 different lengths, so the number of stitches you add will depend on which one you're doing. I'm going to do a little example of this on my sample so you can see how you would add that extra length to the body. So first of all, I'm not on the right to show this, so I'm going to pull out this forward pass because I'm going to need that for this row where I'm extending it. So here I am at the end of a row 1 return pass. I've got 1 loop on my hook, and I'm going to add some stitches out this direction to make it would be the back of the top. So I'm going to make some chains. I'm not really counting right now because I'm just doing a little sample, but I do want to make sure that I do have an even number because that will make it easier for me to get through all my stitches since this stitch requires an even number. So here I am with this little chain sticking out. It looks a little funny. I'm now going to work a foundation row across these chains and then work row 2 forward pass across the fabric I have, and then I've got some extra chains that I made earlier and set aside so I can build out on the other side, which would be the front of the sweater. I'm going to skip my first chain, go into the second chain. I like to go in the bump on the back. Here it doesn't matter as much though because this is going to end up inside the side seam. I'm going to pull up loops through all of these chains. So these are my new, I did 6 stitches. Now, as I transition into the forward pass, I need to get the loop that comes out of the first stitch, which normally is on our hook, but now it isn't. So I'm going to start with that one, and I'm going to go in like I'm doing the Tunisian knit stitch, which is the one where I go into the loop from front to back through the fabric. I tried some different options there, and this feels the most secure, which is a helpful thing. Then I'm going to do my rest of my forward pass of row 2. So here's my simple stitch and my full stitch, and we'll repeat those to the end. Final simple stitch, final full stitch, that one's easy to forget. And then my end stitch as usual through those 2 strands. And now I need to work through 6 chains on the other side. So this is completely detached. You make that at the very first step of the pattern and just hold on to it somewhere. And now I'm ready to work through this. And this feels a little awkward because I've got extra stuff in my hands. Try not to worry about it too much and just get started, and it'll feel a lot better 2 stitches in. So here is my first bump. And I yarn over and draw up a loop there. And I keep doing that across the row. There's not a lot to hold on to. I find this a little bit more awkward than on the other side, but it's worth it for the construction of the sweater, and you can get through it. All right, and then you can certainly stop and count, admire your work. Now we're working in a different direction, which is kind of cool. And then the return pass is the same as it always has been. It's going to feel a little tenuous when I get to those connections where I have my new chains. So let's do it together so you can see that it feels a little awkward for me too. So through 1 loop 1 time, and then yarn over and through 2 loops repeatedly. I like to slow myself down as I get near this connection, because see how there's just 1 little strand of yarn there? Take it slow. One of the cool things is that since now I'm going to yarn over and go through 2 loops, that is 1 from the new sleeve and 1 from the new front of the sweater and 1 from the existing sleeve, which means they are now much more joined together than they were a second ago, and that already feels a lot better to me. Now, as you're doing your sweater, it just got a whole lot bigger, especially if you're doing the longer body. So just know the sleeve was quick and easy, and now it's going to take a bit of time as you do the shoulder. The exact number of inches depends on your size that you're doing, and the pattern has all of that information. You can also just drape it over your shoulder and check it out. What we're doing now is getting where the body can meet at the underarm, and then we're building all the fabric that we want until the neck opening. So even here on my little sample, I've got a few rows. It's a lot more rows on the actual sweater. So that part's going to take some time, and I'm not going to do that on my sample. We're going to jump ahead and talk about changing and creating a neckline opening. And I happen to be in the right place, so I'm ready now for row 1, which is appropriate for building in the neckline opening. And what I'm going to do is work it over only half of my stitches. So I've got the 6 that I did for the body, and then for the sleeve, I've now forgotten, so I'm going to double check how many I have for the sleeve. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, I had 12 total. So I'm going to take the 6 for the body, which is the back of my sweater now, and then another 6, which gets me up to the very center point, and I'm going to do this till I have 12 loops total. Skip the first bar as usual, Tunisian simple stitch 2 together, and then yarn over. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, so I'm going to do this, oh, sorry, 9, didn't count my yarn over there, so 1 I started with, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, I'm going to 12, so I'm going to do 1 more simple stitch 2 together, 1 more yarn over, and for the last stitch, it's not really an end of the row stitch, even though it's going to be the end of my row, so I can't go in the way I normally have, and this is another time I think it's going to be more secure if you go in like a Tunisian knit stitch from front to back through the loop. If you do a simple stitch, it'll be okay, but it'll probably pull a little bit. This is more secure because it's under more of the fabric. So this is my halfway point, and basically I'm going to work back on this half of the stitches. That's going to be the back of the sweater, and the rest are just going to hang out till you're ready for them. They're stable. You don't have to use stitch markers or anything. You're just going to, right now, partway through, start doing your return pass, which feels a little funny since you didn't finish the row, but it does work out quite nicely. Now I'm going to do a few more rows on the back of my sample just so it starts looking sweater shaped, and then you can do that as well if you want to, and then we'll meet back here to work on the front, which will include shaping for the neck. So I've worked a couple extra rows across the back, making sure to end with the row 1 return pass. All this is written in the pattern, of course, but I'm just mentioning it to help remind myself as well. Now this section for the back is just going to hang out for a while. We're going to return to the front section, and then eventually we'll meet to do the other shoulder. So I've gotten to the end of the return pass. I have a loop on my hook, but I need my hook. So I'm going to put a stitch marker in, and it's good to have the kind that lock closed so it can't come out accidentally. You could cut the yarn now, but if you have another source of yarn, and if you bought the kit which has multiple balls of yarn for any size, you have another source of yarn, I suggest leaving what you have attached. We already have a lot of little yarn tails to weave in later on due to the construction. There's no reason to add 2 more. If you're okay with it being attached here, just leave it and take your new ball of yarn. And we're going to start at the first unworked stitches. And the unworked stitches are all these that we didn't deal with before. And if you remember, we were working on a row 1 forward pass at the time. We're going to do that, but we also have to build in our neckline shaping. For this sample, I'm just going to do 1 decrease row. For the top, there are multiple decrease rows. Then we'll do a little bit of working even and start our increases, but we're working on such a small scale I won't do it very many times, but I do want to do a decrease to start here. So first of all, to start, I'm going to get my yarn and I am going to attach this by going into the first unworked stitch, and as I've done before, when I'm doing something like this that's sort of attaching or changing, I'm going to go in as if I'm doing a Tunisian knit stitch so that it is a bit more secure. I'm underneath more of the fabric. And to get your attention, you may just want to hold the tail alongside your hook for a stitch or 2. So there's my first loop. And now I'm going to do my decrease. And in this particular case, I'm going to do a Tunisian simple stitch 3 together. And that's because our pattern is already a simple stitch 2 together. So I'm really just decreasing 1 extra stitch by doing the 3 together here. So I'm going to go into the next 3 vertical bars, yarn over, drop a loop, make sure you get through all of them. You should then have 2 loops on your hook, and then a yarn over. So I basically decrease twice and then increase once with a yarn over. So I have a net decrease of 1, and I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to simple stitch the next 3 together, and then yarn over. And then I'm going to continue as I normally would for a row 2. I'd simple stitch 2 together, yarn over, simple stitch 2 together. You will have a lot more of that to do on the sweater, but since I'm working in scale right now, I'm already at the end of my row. I'm going to make sure I don't forget my final yarn over, and then do my final stitch through the 2 strands. So now I have the front of the sweater being worked. The return pass is the same as it always has been for this projects. I really like having an easy something. Like, there's a lot going on here, and I know right now I'm going through a lot really fast because I'm working at such a small scale. For you, with the actual sweater, you would have had some time to get used to the stitch on the sleeve. You would have had a lot of long rows working on that shoulder. By the time you get to the neck, I find you're probably ready for something more interesting, and you also have longer rows here, so it doesn't feel as quick as what I'm doing. Now, I'm almost to the end here, but this has gotten real loose, so I'm just going to give a little tug on that yarn and even hold on to it, if that makes me feel more comfortable about finishing the row. And then with the actual sweater, you would keep doing some decreases, but at the moment it doesn't make sense because I don't have a whole lot of real estate here. So I'm going to do some of the rows of just working even. Same thing you did on the sleeve and the body. So I'm going to start here with my row 2 forward pass, skip the first bar, simple stitch, full stitch, simple stitch, full stitch all the way across. Now in the pattern, it tells you to do a certain number of rows of working even. And I want you to stop when you're halfway through those rows, which means you are halfway through the front of the sweater. And I want you to check a couple of things. One, go ahead and drape it over your shoulder and see if the sizing is what you want. If you put the working row center front, and see if that is truly the size that you want. It's of course going to be open on the side at that point, so you can kind of pinch it together at the side. So I'm going to pretend I'm wearing a shirt and show you what I mean, because it is a little funny to do. Just like measuring yourself, it's a time that might be helpful if you have a crafty friend to help you out. So what I would do, I'd have this much of the sweater, and I would drape it over my shoulder, or if you have a dress form, that's great, but a lot of people don't. So I drape it over my shoulder, try to line up my working row at center front. You could even pin it to a t-shirt that you're wearing if that's helpful to make it centered. And then come over here to the side and either pin or just pinch the side seams together and see if that is the amount of ease that you want center to center. And if you want more, work even extra rows. And if you want less, work even fewer rows. It's really nice, especially if you're new at making garments, to have something like this that you can try on as you go and make adjustments. You don't have to take it all out if you want 2 extra inches. You'll just work 2 extra inches in the center of the neck and that will be just fine. The only thing is that you will have to change the back a little bit, which you've already done. If you're adding extra rows on the front, you will add extra rows on the back. If you're taking out some rows on the front, you'll unravel a few rows on the back. But this I find is the best time to check the size. It's harder to check it when it's on your back because you just can't see it as well. All right, so now we've decreased for the neck and worked even for the neck, maybe adding in a little custom fitting at the moment. And it's time to start increasing for the neck. If you've done the other projects in this series, this will be really easy for you because nothing is new. If you haven't, it's not super hard, you can do it anyway. So I'm ready here for a row 1 forward pass, but I'm going to do it with my increases. And here the increases are a little bit away from the edge to help give it a smooth edge and look more like the decreased side did. So I'm going to start, as usual, skipping the first stitch and doing a Tunisian simple stitch 2 together and a yarn over. And then I'm going to do a make 1. So I'm going to find the bump at the top, and it's almost a little bit to the back side of the top, and insert my hook into that bump. It's always a little tight here. It's a good sign you're in the right place. And yarn over and draw up a loop. That has increased 1 stitch. And then I'm going to do another yarn over because I want to keep my lace patterning of a solid thing and then a space. So a yarn over here, and that's my second increase, and that's all I need. Now I'm ready to just continue the row. So next up I do my simple stitch 2 together and yarn over, simple stitch 2 together, yarn over, and continue that to the end of the row. After the final yarn over, we'll go into the last stitch, going under those 2 strands as usual. When you've finished your increasing, which I have now, you should be back to the same number of stitches that you began with on the front and the same number that you had on the back. And the return pass, as always, is going to be the same. And that is the end of my miniature neck, and now we're ready to start the other shoulder, which is where we join it all together, which is kind of an exciting part because then it starts really looking like a sweater. I always love when projects look like the shape they're going to be, and some things do that right away and some things it's partway through or all the way to the end. So I now am done with this section and I can cut or break my yarn. This yarn actually breaks really easily. It shouldn't break as you're just crocheting with it, but if you don't have scissors nearby, you can just yank on it and it'll come apart. And on this one, I'm going to go ahead and tie this off by pulling the cut end through that final loop. And we're going to return to the working loop that we have held over here on the back. And I still have yarn attached there too, which is nice. So I'm going to take the stitch marker out and put that loop back on my hook. And notice we've got all these little yarn tails, so that made me happy that I didn't cut this yarn and create 2 more for myself. Now I'm ready for row 2 forward pass, and I'm ready for that on both sides, which is important. So I'm going to go through simple stitch, full stitch, simple stitch, full stitch, all the way across my back of the sweater. And at the end, I'm going to go through my 2 strands at the end, stitch like I always do, but I'm not going to stop and go backwards. I'm now going to join this. So I'm going to go to the front of the sweater, and for my very first stitch, as I have been doing whenever I'm joining something, I'm going to go into this one like I'm doing the Tunisian knit stitch into the loop under a big chunk of the fabric there, because that will feel nice. And then I'm ready to do my simple stitch, full stitch, simple stitch, full stitch, all the way to the end of the row. And there, see, I just went under a little something extra, and I felt it felt a little different. I don't always look really closely at my crochet. I've been doing it since I was 3, and it's been my work for more than 20 years, so it's a little bit background, but I have trained myself to feel if something feels a little bit off. And here's my last one through the last 2 strands. This is a great time to stop and check your stitches and make sure that you've got the same number you had for the other shoulder. And then you're going to go back into your long rows across everything, and I'm going to do a few rows of that, and I'll meet you back here to show you how to separate it out and go from these big long rows that are from the bottom back to the bottom front and bring it back to the sleeve and do a little bit of finishing. So I'll see you soon. All right, so I did a couple extra rows for the shoulder of my miniature sweater, and now I'm going to do the row that divides it to finish the back and the front, and then continue on to the right sleeve. I finished with a row 1 return pass, so I'm ready for a row 2 forward pass, and I'm going to start by finishing off the first 6 stitches since that's what I added for the body. I am going to go into the first one as if I'm doing a Tunisian knit stitch. Let me do that again so you can see it better. So rather than going sideways through the bar, I'm going straight through the fabric, and I'm doing a single crochet. So yarn over and draw up a loop through the fabric, and then yarn over and draw through those 2 loops to finish that first stitch. The next one, I'm going to do another single crochet, but I'm going to insert my hook as the full stitch into the big space. Yarn over and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through both. So that's my first 2 stitches. I'm going to repeat that. So as if I'm doing a knit stitch and do my single crochet. The next single crochet is inserting as if the full stitch. And for my miniature sample here, I'm going to do that for a total of 6. I highly recommend when you're doing your actual sweater that you stop at this point and just make sure that it looks like it lines up, that these are the same length, that you're lined up at the top of that edge that's here. Now I'm going to transition into the stitches that I'm going to keep working for the sleeve. So now I'm going to do my regular row 2 forward pass. So I have a loop on my hook. I'm going to go through the first one as a simple stitch, yarn over and drop a loop, and then as a full stitch, and I'm going to keep doing that across. Simple, full, simple, full. The pattern tells you how many stitches to go to here. It's the same number as you started with the left sleeve when you started, but I also like to double check myself. As I'm getting to the end of the section, I want to leave 6 here that are unworked. So this would be 1, 2's the whole, 3, 4, 5, 6. That makes sense. I still have 1 more to go, and I'm going to insert this one as if I'm doing the knit stitch to make it a little stronger connection at this corner. These remaining stitches are going to stay unworked. Later on we're going to finish them, but for now we want to leave them as they are and start a return pass on our live loops to keep going on the sleeve. Now I'm going to do a couple rows on the sleeve just because symmetry is nice, and even though I'm making a tiny little sample swatch, maybe somebody's doll is going to wear it at some point, and I'd like to have this sleeve match the other one. So I'm just going to do a couple more rows and then finish that off, and I'll come back and show you how to finish off the stitches at the front. We're going to block it, we're going to do a little bit of seaming, we're going to tuck in some yarn tails, and then you'll be all set to start your own sweater. So I'll see you back here in a few minutes. So I did a couple more rows on the sleeve just for symmetry, and I did go ahead and finish off the sleeve doing the single crochet as I did for the back, and I'm going to do it right now for the front as well. As usual, when loops are just left at the end of a return pass, it looks a little messy. So even though this is going into a seam, I'm going to go ahead and work my single crochet there. For one thing, it'll make all the seams feel the same as each other. So I need to attach my yarn, and I'm going to do that by going into the first stitch here, knitwise, so it feels like a strong attachment, and then I'm going in like a full stitch and yarn over and draw through both loops to finish off that single crochet. Next one is like a knit stitch, go through both loops. This is another time where we only should ever have 2 loops on our hook halfway through a stitch, and then that stitch is resolved, we're down to 1 loop. And the very last one, as usual, I go under 2 strands of the final stitch. Now here you have a choice. If you can, you could leave the yarn attached so it's ready for you to do your seam. If not, you can just leave a long tail. And you do need kind of a long tail. I've only got a short seam, so I don't need that long of a tail, but you could measure out and see how long you need. We're going to do slip stitch, so it doesn't take a lot, but it's about 3 to 4 times the length of the seam. And the length of the seam is going to be that section I just did along the front and then along the underseam here, the inseam of the sleeve. So it'll be about that long, 3 or 4 times, extra is never a bad thing. Or just leave the yarn attached if you want to. I could do that by tying it off by putting the entire ball of yarn through that loop. I'm working on such a small scale, I'm super comfy. Cutting the yarn, we're going to tie that off, and then we're going to head into blocking. This sample is kind of two things. One is it's letting me show you how everything goes together. It can also be your gauge swatch. Ideally it's a little bit bigger, at least you do like a longer sleeve so you can get a good section to swatch. You are definitely going to want to block your gauge swatch. A lot of yarns change size the first time they hit water. Some get bigger, this one's going to get bigger, some get smaller. And you do not want to make something that fits you perfectly until the first time you wash it, and then it doesn't fit you the way you want anymore. So I know people don't like doing homework. Gauge swatch feels like homework, blocking feels like homework. It will save you time in the long run because you won't make an entire top and not wear it because it doesn't fit the way that you want to. Or make almost an entire top but run out of yarn when you're not quite done the sleeve. The swatch is just a little bit extra effort, and I promise you in the long run, if not for this project, the long run of your crafting career, it is going to save you time because you won't make things that just don't work. So I'm going to grab some water and a blocking mat, and I'll show you my blocking process, and then we'll do a little bit of seaming and finishing. All right, so now I'm ready to block. I've got my blocking surface. I just need one of these puzzle pieces. You might need a lot when you're doing your actual piece, your actual sweater, but it's nice because you can configure them in whatever shape you need. I've got my sample that I made. I've got all these yarn ends attached. That is good. There's a really long one for seaming. I'm leaving all the other ones for now too. Because this is lace, I expect it to relax and grow a little bit in the blocking process, and I don't want to weave in my yarn ends now and then have that restrict the relaxation of the fabric. So I'm going to get it wet. I've just got a little bit of water here, and I want it really, really wet. So I'm going to squeeze it a little bit. It should, this yarn, it's easy to tell because it changes color a lot, but you want to make sure it's totally wet. If you need to, just leave it there. Go do something else for a few minutes, come back. I'm going to speed it up a little bit and squeeze out my water. And then I usually like to take something like a towel, or I've got paper towels here. Lay it on there. You do not have to be precise at this point in the laying out, and just roll it up to squish a lot of that water out. Here I can grab it in my fist. At home I might push on it. If your towel is really sopping wet and you really want to wear this tomorrow, maybe get a fresh towel, do the whole process again. We want to have this be damp everywhere, which means that we need to get it totally saturated first and then take out a lot of the water. You can't just lay it out and spritz it with a spray bottle and have it go through the real blocking process. So now I'm going to lay this out, and let me get myself oriented. There we go. Sleeve, sleeve, back, front. I can tell both because the shape of the neckline comes down in the front, and yours will be much more obvious, and also just I can tell where the finishing edges are compared to the starting edge. Now this is a time that you're probably going to want to have a tape measure and also some blocking pins. You want some that are stainless steel so they don't rust. You don't necessarily have to pin it a lot, what I find with this particular thing, but you might find, you know, a corner that's really poking up. What I mostly do now is just try to get the fabric to relax a little bit. It should open up the lace. I am stretching it a little bit within reason. And when it feels good and looks good to me, that's when I pull out my tape measure. And for your sweater, I want you to check a few different measurements now while you can adjust them. So this again is the sleeve facing me and the other sleeve away from me. I would check here, which is across the back of the sweater, to see if this is the right size. Mine is just under 3 inches, which means I have a 6-inch circumference. Those are not going to be your numbers when you have a whole sweater, but let's say you wanted a 60-inch circumference, it should be 30 at this point. So check, I like to check those are the same. This one's a little smaller on this side, so I'm going to give that a little extra stretch to make them the same as each other. I might do the same thing with my sleeve circumference, which is here and here. I might check the body length, which is from the neck opening down, or I can measure the whole thing and divide it by 2, and adjust it so it is the size that I am wanting it to be. If it seems like it's laying flat, there's no need to pin, but if there's anything that seems a little funny, like here I've got a corner that's not very cornery, but actually I think it's because my yarn tail is tucked in, so that's actually fine on its own. But if there's a corner that's really tilting up, you can certainly put a pin in there and hold it. This is not a piece where I want you to really yank and pull on it. We do that sometimes, like with my little shawlette I'm wearing. I definitely put a little bit more tension on all these little picot points to open up that lace. Here, it should kind of want to settle into the right place, especially when it's damp. So a few pins if necessary, but you probably don't have to do a lot. I sometimes will go back and check my measurements again just because we're setting the stitches through blocking. They're going to want to stay where they were this first time they got wet and then dried. And then after a while, I have to remind myself to stop fussing with it and just go away and give it a break and let it dry. Because sometimes I will just sit and noodle around for 10 minutes that I don't need to do. I'm so used to projects like this where I do have to put in 50, 60, 200 pins that it almost feels like this is too easy to just put it down, smoosh it out, and then walk away, but that's all it needs. So we're going to let this dry. Depending on your weather, it might be just a couple hours, it might be a couple of days. Let it completely dry, and then we will come back to do the seaming and tuck in some of those yarn tails. Okay, so our little sweater has blocked. We're ready to seam it together and then tuck in some of the yarn tails. I've actually already tucked in a lot of yarn tails on this one just so you could see the shape without all of those little dangling bits in the way. But I'll be adding some yarn tails with the seaming, so we'll have a few that we can do. You may actually decide to do that on your piece. Once it's blocked and dried, you can tuck in all the yarn tails except for the long one that you left for seaming, and that way the shorter ones won't get in your way or get tangled. And when you're done seaming, you're a lot closer to being ready to wear the thing, which tends to make me happy if I can put it on right away. This is a boxy thing. It can be hard to kind of understand the shaping of it, so I'm just going to orient myself. I've got one sleeve facing me, one sleeve away from me. This is the front with the curve to the neckline, and the back is a straight across neckline. What I want to do is fold it in half with the right sides together. Those are the nice sides or the outsides of the sweater. Looks a lot better on this side than that one, so you should be able to tell pretty clearly. And I want to fold it so that I'm folding it on the shoulder line. So if the sleeve's facing me, it's center towards me to the center away from me. So I'm going to fold it together like that, and my little seam is going to go from the bottom of the body up through the bottom of the sleeve, and I'll have two of them since I've got two sides. You can hold it whichever way feels good to you, but you're going to want to start towards your dominant side, and we're going to be doing a slip stitch to join these together. So to start, I'm going to find the first V of the first stitch here on the piece that's closer to my body. It's being a little fiddly, so I'm going to get into position here. I like to go under both strands of the V, and then the same thing on the first stitch of the piece that's farther away from my body. I got both strands of the V there, but I got a little something else as well. And you may find it's easier to put your hook in first and then deal with tensioning your yarn, because you notice mine fell off because my index finger wanted to come down and help. I've got a little tail here I'm just going to hold alongside my hook for my tension. And we're doing slip stitch. So I'm going to yarn over and pull it back through everything. I've now joined my yarn. Then I'm going to the next stitch. I'm going to insert my hook underneath the first V of the front piece. This one's a little tight. And then the first V of the next piece. That one's looser. And yarn over and pull through everything. I'm down to one loop on my hook again. Now you do not have to use the long hook for this. So if you have a shorter hook that feels more comfy in your hands, absolutely fine at this point, because you're only ever going to have one loop on your hook. You don't need to have the big long piece. You could even use this and take the cord off if that feels comfier for you. At this point though, if you've made the whole sweater, you're used to it. So I'm going to keep doing this up this is my side seam right now that I'm working on. And I'm going to make you watch me do the whole thing because there is just a little transition at the underarm that is not hard, but you might not feel super confident about it. So this is my last side seam piece. I'm now going to transition to kind of turn the corner and do the underarm. The good news is this isn't an armpit. Nobody's going to look that closely at it, so don't worry too much. You can also try it, get through it, and stop and check. If there's a big gaping hole, go back, do something different, but probably it's going to work out just fine. So at the transition, I'm going to find the next thing that kind of looks like a stitch, front and back. They might look different from each other because you've got one piece where it was the beginning and one piece where it was the end. They are different. It's not just that they look that way. Basically, I've got chains on one side and single crochets on the other, but you should still be able to find two strands on each. At this point now, I'm working into side edges, but I can still find two strands on each, just like where I put my hook for that final stitch of every row. It's the same place. So we're going to keep doing our single crochets until we get to the end. And then we can cut our yarn and tie it off. You don't need to leave up a very long tail here, you'll just need to sew it together. And then I usually, right after I do that seam, will tuck in those yarn tails, and then I'll do the other seam and tuck in those yarn tails, just because for a lot of people having a lot of yarn tails just doesn't feel fun, and they sometimes put it away, and sometimes they put it away for a while. And so by tucking them in when I can, then I don't have a big, huge project at the end. So I'm keeping this inside out, and I'm going to weave in my yarn tail. And this is a little different from the other projects. I can't go diagonally because I'd be going across some of these holes. So what I'm going to do instead is keep changing direction, but it's going to be a bit more linear. So to get started, I often will take a little stitch here at the very base to join this together a bit more. We call this a figure 8. The yarn feels like it's more attached on this side to my right. So I'm going to go to the piece on my left, and I'm going to go in from the right side, which is currently inside out, so it's on the inside to the wrong side. Pull that through. That's connected them a lot. But I'm going to do the same thing on the far side, again, right side to wrong side. And that is going to really, really smooth it out. This is pretty miniature, but you'll see on your real one, it just makes it feel like there's a nice strong connection there. I'm going to weave in my yarn tail. So I'm going to pick a direction, any direction, and poke my needle through so that it is pretty covered up on the side that I can see, and also doesn't poke through the other side. And I can tell by feeling, but you can also turn it over to make sure. So I go in a direction for a little while. The details really don't matter here. Pull the yarn through, and then what I think really, really helps is now to change direction and go in a different direction for a little while. Checking, I can feel that it didn't poke through the other side. I can also peek and check on it. I don't have a big flash of my silver needle here. Pull it through. I like to have 3 or 4 of those direction changes because I find that keeps that yarn end from wiggling its way out when you're wearing it and washing it and all of that. But if you have 3 or 4 direction changes, that's plenty. And you can snip off the end of the yarn. You'll also have another end from where you joined it for seaming, unless you have a reserved tail. You do the same thing there. Then you're going to rejoin yarn, slip stitch up the other side seam, tuck in those yarn tails, and then you will have a finished sweater. So mine is only halfway finished, but you can see how it's going to be adorable. There is one more step though that I suggest you do. When you've done a seam, it tends to kind of fold inwards a little bit. So this is somewhere you want to do a little bit more blocking, and you could do another wet block, but it's hard because you have a 3-dimensional object, and also you might really, really want to wear this today because it's so cute and fun. So here I usually do a steam block, so I can set up a steamer or an iron that steams and put this on top of something. At home it's an ironing board for a real one. For this I might find something or like roll up a little washcloth so I can kind of have something underneath it. And just use your steamer or your iron set to steam. I don't want you to iron it and actually press it, but just go with the iron, and then put the iron away and use your hands to moosh it into place and flatten out that seam. It does make a big difference, and it is a very small investment of time. And then you are ready to wear your top, and I hope that you'll be really excited to make another one. Try it in a different color. I did a bright one. I'm probably going to want some neutrals myself. I did the crop version. I might want to do a longer one. I feel like this is a really good wardrobe staple, and you might want to make quite a few of them because they're pretty quick and fast and fun, and I think it'll be a really easy one for you to add to all kinds of different outfits. If you didn't already get your kit, you can do that at the link below or at MissouriQuiltCo.com, and I would love to see what you make. You can also follow me here on YouTube. I am at Kira-Dulaney, and we'll put a link for that as well, and feel free to tag me on Instagram, Kira K Designs. I would really love to see these out in the world. If you see me at a yarn event and you're wearing yours, please stop me. I might stop you because I usually keep an eye out for my designs when I'm walking around. I had a great time working on this crochet collection for Missouri Star. I hope you enjoyed the videos and you enjoy your projects as well. Happy crocheting.